This is the tutorial where we cover how to prepare the purchase and sales agreement. The purchase and sales agreement is sometimes called the P&S, and it's a contract between the buyer and the seller of real estate, where the buyer promises to buy and the seller promises to sell certain property for a certain price. The P&S is typically signed 4 to 6 weeks before the closing. So if the date at the top of the purchase and sales agreement is today's date, like this, 8 June 15, then the date down here in paragraph 8 is typically no earlier than June 30th, and it may be the middle of July, okay? And it could be end of July, all right? To start drafting the purchase and sales agreement, you insert the name and address of the sellers above the word seller. So for purposes of your outside project, you are going to be completing a purchase and sales agreement where you're buying Magnolia Avenue from the Browns. So the Browns will be the sellers. So it's Richard, Brown, Catherine, Brown, and Samantha Brown, all of 32 Magnolia Avenue. We just have Lynn, Mass. 01904. And then below the word seller and above the word buyer is where you insert the name of the buyers. For purpose of your outside project, you are the buyer. So your name and address goes here. All right. Just be careful when you do this. Make sure the seller's names are appearing above the word seller, which is right here, and the buyer's names is appearing above the word buyer. And now you move on to the description, and there you type in the address of the property, right? And to find the square footage of your lot, the easiest thing to do is to go to the assessor's records and pull up the assessor's card for the property that you're interested in, and that'll give you the square footage on the lot. If you look at the tutorial, the very first tutorial of how to do the title search, that will give you a better explanation as to how you get into that assessor's records so that you can pull up that information. So I'm going to leave it blank. And then here you put in the county where the property is located. Since Lynn is in Essex South is what goes on that line. If you were in Everett, it would read Middlesex South. And then you put the book and page reference of the deed into the Browns. So the deed into your current owners, which is 27255, page 482. Okay? Paragraph 3 talks about improvements and fixtures on the property. If you remember from Chapter 1, we talked about fixtures in Chapter 1. Those are the things that are attached or fixed to the property so that they go along, they stay with the structure, if you will, and the real estate when it's sold. If there was something the seller wanted to exclude, a fixture, you'd write here, excluding the, let's say, chandelier, Chandlier. I'm spelling it wrong. I don't know how to spell it, I guess. And the living room, that kind of thing. All right. Seller has to convey good and sufficient quitclaim deed. There's a plan to be recorded, meaning there's been a division or subdivision of the land. Seller has to deliver the plan. And then here you insert your purchase price. For purpose of your outside project, you're making up your purchase price. So you just type it in the form of words, 250,000 dollars. Okay, so now you got your purchase price in. You got to break down your purchase price. And the first thing you put in is the amount that was paid by the buyer to the broker at the time that the offer was made, usually called the good faith money or good faith deposit, which is just a little bit of money that binds up the offer and makes the buyer know that something serious is going on. So you put that number here. Then above it is the amount of money that the buyer then gives to the broker when he or she signs the purchase and sales agreement. So it's typically around 2 or 3%. So if you take the $250,000 purchase price and multiply it times 3%, you get $7,500. The broker already has $1,000, so you just give him or her $6,500. And then the total is the $250,000, which is the full purchase price of the property. And then the difference between $250,000 and $7,500 is what appears on this line right here. So that number is 250,000 take away $7,500 is $242,500 if I did the math correctly. And I usually check it by adding 242,500, 6,500, 1,000, and I get $250,000. Now you work on setting the time for closing, which is sometimes referred to as the time for performance, because that is the time when the buyer and seller will actually perform their most important promise in the purchase and sales agreement, which is just to buy and sell the property. So you pick a day of the week that is not a holiday, all right? Like I said, if the P&S is dated June 6th, this is no earlier than June 30th. Could be July 14th or 13th or something like that. And it takes place at the Registry of Deeds. So where the property is located, so for us, since we're in Lynn, it's Essex South. And then the time, it's not typically etched in stone. There's a lot of changing of that. So don't be too concerned with it when you set it. But set it for a time that at least the registry is open for recording. I never set it super, super early in the morning or super, super late in the day. So I usually go with 10 o'clock a.m. and I switch this to an A, or 1 o'clock p.m. and leave it like that. And then 9, 10, 11, and 12 basically say this, that at the time of the closing, the seller is going to deliver full possession of the premises free of tenants and title defects in the same condition as they were when he first saw it in compliance with zoning. If for some reason the seller is unable to give title in accordance with that paragraph, or deliver possession because there's a tenant on the property or something like that, then the seller has the right to extend the time for closing for 30 days, and in which time he will then correct these defects in title or this inability to deliver title. If after that time the seller still can't remove the defects, then the buyer gets his deposit back and the agreement is canceled, unless the buyer elects to accept the title or the premises as is, right? Insurance is the next paragraph you really need to deal with. And basically what we're talking about insurance is, it basically says this: until the delivery of the deed, the seller needs to maintain the insurance that he has on the property. And here it looks like you'd put a number, but what you usually write is as is presently, but you gotta spell it right, P-R-E-S-E-N, insured, I-N-S-U-R-E-D. So basically what you're saying is that until the delivery of the deed, the seller will maintain insurance on the premises as it's currently insured. Okay? Now, that's if you're representing the seller. If you're the buyer, you might be a little concerned because that might not be enough insurance. I mean, it's whatever the seller has for insurance, but it might be not enough money to replace the premises if they were destroyed or damaged between the time the P&S was signed and the time of the closing. So buyers sometimes like to see full replacement cost insurance. Okay? And that means it's enough insurance to ensure to cover the cost of the repair or the replacement of the building in the event it is completely destroyed by some kind of casualty. All right? The next thing you got to do here is the broker's fee. And the broker's fee is typically 5% of your purchase price. Could be 6, could be 4, but it's typically 5. So you take $250,000, you multiply it times 5, and you get $12,500, which is a fee the seller pays, and you list the names of the broker. Okay, so for purposes of your on-site project, make up a broker and insert it there. CENTURY, Century 21. You could have co-brokes, which you'd put Century 21 and the name of the second broker. All the brokers have to make a warranty that they are licensed brokers. And the deposit is typically held by the listing broker. So that's what goes there. All deposits made hereunder shall be held in escrow and accounted for at closing by the broker Century 21. If the buyer fails to fulfill his promises, which means perform, which means buy the property, the seller gets to keep the $7,500 that's listed in paragraph 7 as liquidated damages. Okay? Paragraph 26 is the next paragraph that you really need to address. And it's one of the most important paragraphs because basically what it's saying is the buyer is going to apply for a mortgage. If for some reason the buyer can't get mortgage financing at a given amount, which is where my cursor is right now, whatever that amount is, then the buyer can elect to cancel the contract, get his deposit back, and not have to buy the house. So you need to put on that line exactly how much the buyer intends to borrow. Okay, so if it's a loan where the buyer's got to put down 5%, then the buyer is borrowing $237,500. Okay, and so now what this says is the buyer is going to apply for a loan in that amount. If he or she can't get the loan for that amount by the date that I'm going to stick here, then the buyer can get out by giving notice to the seller and the broker. And this is key here. This date is typically a week before the closing. So it's usually June 24th. But the date should at least be a weekday that is not a holiday. Okay? And in order for the buyer to take advantage of this right to cancel and get his deposit back, he has to use diligent efforts to obtain a mortgage commitment. And it's deemed using diligent efforts if the buyer makes a mortgage application at least one, just prior to signing the purchase and sales agreement. So if the purchase and sales agreement got signed on June 8th, then on June 10th, that would be the day that you give the buyer to get his mortgage application complete. All right? That is pretty much it, except for if you have some additional provisions, you can add them right here, or you can attach. So you could write here, the buyer agrees to let the seller occupy the premises for 10 days following closing at the rate of $1,000 for the 10 days, that kind of thing. You could stick it right here by typing it, or you could type it on a separate sheet of paper and put see exhibit, gotta spell it right, A attached hereto and incorporated herein. And that is pretty much all you need to do. The buyer and seller would sign. You don't sign your outside project draft. It's just a draft. And here's some language on the very last page that allows you, if you need to extend the time performance, which is the closing date, because something's not done, you could just use this form, and then the buyer and seller could sign it so that it's clear it's been agreed upon. And that is really all there is to completing a